Hello there, sword fans. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Windlass Battlecry Viking Sword, and it actually has a longer name that I'm not going to bother to learn because foreshadowing. But before I get into it, some notes. One, this is a review sample that is sent to me from sword friend Matt, who is a private sword citizen, not a company. Nobody else is sponsoring it, just a fellow sword friend out there sent this to me, one who values swords and their application and that they're weapons and that they're supposed to be durable and to see, but well, frankly, likes to see me push them to failure. And I am happy to oblige, so special thanks to sword from Matt. Two, I don't do any kind of experimental archaeology. I don't know much of anything about Viking martial arts, and I'm known to not particularly like the grips on them, so do know there's some bias there. And three, I'm not an expert. I do review swords quite a lot, frankly. I've talked about them extensively through the course of hundreds of videos, but I don't fancy myself an expert. So keep that context in mind as you hear my babbles. So at $350, this is Windlass's attempt at a relatively budget-conscious Viking sword. There are less expensive options, but there are certainly more expensive options. And it's worth calling out that Viking swords, despite my lack of fondness for how they feel in the hand, can be immaculate masterworks of craftsmanship and beauty and history, and I absolutely love the way they look, and I love the history behind them, and I love the aesthetic, but I never really like how they feel. That said, I do think none of that is really present or applicable to this review. It is a $350 sword. It's supposed to be budget conscious. It's supposed to be Viking-esque in appearance, maybe as a training tool for experimental archaeology or Viking-style martial arts, maybe as a reenactment tool, maybe just to whack shit in your backyard. And so is it good for that, I suppose, is the main question that needs to be asked, and that is what I intend to answer. So hopefully that's useful. Anyway, on with the reviewing. The pommel, the end cap, the bit right here, well, more or less it has a Viking-esque looking little detail on it, and it has this half moon or half circle type pommel that I can never get to feel comfortable in my hand. And if I had a single complaint about Viking swords, it would be the pommel. Not that they're not durable or not constructed well or not beautiful, but just I cannot get them to feel comfortable. And people have said, that's user error, you're dumb, and you'd be right. But I still, no matter what I do, no matter how I hold it, I cannot get this thing not to either jut into the meat of my hand or feel comfortable in some way that allows me some sort of feeling of control and connectedness with the weapon. I can hold it, but at best it's a mediocre solution and a subpar option in comparison to its later historical counterparts or other cultural counterparts at the same time. I don't like the grip on Viking swords, and it is all and 100% the pommel. This thing, if I hold it, juts into my hand and doesn't allow me to flick anything with a wrist, and if I try to do it in a hammer, anyway, I'm ranting. I don't like Viking pommels. This one, though, has some designs. It's a little bit on the smaller side. That's not necessarily bad, but it doesn't prevent it from jutting into the meat of your hand. It is chamfered on edges, so nothing at least makes me bleed, but the pressure and whatnot from these lobes is still present, omnipresent, in fact, in me operating this sword. It has a peen on the end here, which is somewhat crudely done. There are hammer marks and whatnot on it, but given the kind of rough and tumble aesthetic, I don't necessarily mind it. I can get a fingernail on it, but even if I tried to hold this in a hammer grip or like a handshake grip and have the peen access some of the meat of my hand, none of it causes me any discomfort. Anyway, the pommel is on there and the sword is broken, and so that is a testament to that it is on there pretty good. Moving up to the grip. This is what appears to be a wood core grip that is bound in some sort of leather that has some adhesive on it, and the first layer is held up really well and didn't move around. The second layer actually held up to quite a lot of abuse, and despite the fact that it appears relatively flimsy and is wrapped around, it actually took a lot to get it to come loose, though I would imagine with prolonged reenactment or general use this is going to come undone. And the underlayer is reasonably secure, so it's worth noting that. It's an artificial kind of leather and it feels cheap in the hand. At the same time, it held on there reasonably well. It didn't damage. I threw it at a tree and lots of other abusive things, and apart from one seam of it coming undone from some of the adhesive, it had little other problems. The way it's shaped is easy to index, and I could always tell where one of the edges is, despite my grumblings about how it felt when I did. The crossguard is it's the gap is filled in with some sort of pitch resin, but it's there. I like that at least moisture and whatnot can't ride down into the handle, and so that much was nice. Over the course of really abusing the sword, the crossguard did develop a little bit of rattle. I could feel it moving around, but it took throwing it at a tree several times, abusing it on a tree, thrusting into it, basically doing some very abusive stuff, undebatably abusive things that theoretically could happen in a war, but aren't expected to be survivable by the sword without any consequences. So the crossguard did develop some rattle. I like that it has little slats in it, or some attempt to match the theme of the pommel down here, and overall it's handsome looking. Both fittings feature some sort of blackening, which is present in this black on black with some blacky black theme that is around this windlass piece. And the chape on the scabbard has, or the sheath has it as well. Everything is blacked out, and well, I'm not above that. I happen to like the aesthetic of it, and it held up well. I beat the crap out of it, and the patina on it actually held up pretty well, as it did on the crossguard, as did the resin and pitch, or whatever they've used to fill the gaps in there. It actually held up pretty well. So the next bit would be the scabbard, and this is more, well, I guess sheath. It's leather with a metal chape at the end. It's all blacked out. It does the things that windlass scabbards do, in that it's relatively stiff leather, but it is leather. It's floppy a little bit. It has some level of retention, but not necessarily great, and it binds in places that aren't super comfortable. But again, at $350, it comes with a scabbard, and that is a feature. It's not a terrible scabbard. It also came with a belt retention system that I didn't bother using too much. I didn't adhere it to a belt, but it goes around the little nipple bit on the metal part, the metal mouth of the scabbard, and then has basically a long leather bit, 2 belt loops that go in, and you can attach it to your belt and look super Viking-y, even though it's a very uniquely windlass thing. I haven't seen another sword mounting system exactly like it, but I don't know much about history. Anyway, the scabbard is okay. It does the job, and it is there, and it allows you to carry it around in some sort of garb or reenactment or whatever, what have you. Anyway, the blade, the pointy stabby part, the part that you're maybe here to see and talk about, it has this blacked out patina that is unique in the sense of the Battlecry options. They are abundant on the options from the Battlecry line, which are usually all blacked out, and I do like it. Honestly, it abates rust. It does the things that it's supposed to do, and it looks kind of cool. The blade that I got had an edge on it. I'm not sure, given that it was a secondhand sword, and from Sword for Matt, I'm not sure how secondhand it was or how abused, if he did any sharpening on it, because sometimes he does. But the edge on it was reasonably good. It cut pool noodles, and despite my grumblings about the feeling, if it was a softer target, I really didn't have too much trouble getting into it. The blade itself has all of the characteristics that you've heard me complain about with windlass swords, though. Surface ripples, really broad edges, lines that wander around a little bit, and if I flex the blade, it also flexed kind of right in the middle of the blade rather than towards the top third. It didn't have much in the way of distal or profile taper, and as I understand it, these Viking blades did have a little bit of distal taper in them, not necessarily profile taper, but the measurements are all in the description down below. Anyway, there's not much else to say. The profile, or rather the patina on the blade, has some interesting kind of effects and splatter patterns, if you will. It's kind of a neat looking. It's like a zombie Viking sword kind of thing, but overall it's interesting looking. It has a fuller that runs almost the entire length of the blade and terminates just a little bit more than an inch below the tip of the blade. It thrusts well, and I suppose that enough brings me to using the blade and moving it around. So I don't study any kind of martial arts that really apply to using it, so I'll dispense with the notions that I have anything valuable to add there. What I can say is it feels like a sword, but it hurts my hand, and that's the only thing that I can really fixate on. If this blade were attached to something else, I'm sure I would actually like it quite a lot, because the blade feels nice, but I just can't get it to feel comfortable in my hand. And that's my nuisance to add, and how does it move around. But hopefully the measurements and weapon dynamics provide some insight into it if you happen to not be minded, well, and at least not be bothered in the same way by Viking grips that I am. The cutting, though, is maybe where I can add a little bit more. It popped pool noodles apart reasonably well. I thought it would fail catastrophically at everything, and it didn't. I was able to get reasonably good edge alignment. I was able to pop some pool noodles apart. It wasn't the easiest thing to cut with. As soon as I impacted, though, some like harder targets, I really found that this grip would turn in my hand, and all of the problems that I had with it were exacerbated. And again, user error, I know, but as I'm swinging it, I'm really trying to find a comfortable way to throw this thing out there, and I just never find it. And when I don't make Well, basically, when I don't sing through the target, this thing bites me, and it hurts. It's not fun to use. Every time I'm reminded that I don't like the grip on Viking swords. It whacks into my hand. It hurts the meat of my hand. It's just not fun to use. And if I swing hard and do a good strike, then I'm rewarded by not having pain. So it's a great sensei in that respect. But I could cut through some things. It cut through water bottles. It cut through pool noodles. It did all the kind of backyard fun stuff reasonably well. But as soon as I brought it to like an ice jug, in some cases it swung wide, or I didn't do a good strike. It didn't cut through, and it whacked into the stand, and I felt all of it in my hand. Bringing it to more aggressive stuff, though, and doing some other bits, I chopped this and that, you might say, and it held up reasonably well. Apart from, there was some bend developing, and if I slapped it on the stand, I could get the blade to bend a little bit. It's on the softer side, so I'm surprised that the edge held up as well as it did. I didn't notice any deflection, degradation, and it still seemed to chop through all the things I needed it to through the course of testing. But it is a little bit on the softer side, which is notable that I could get it to bend basically through the course of testing. Not at 90 degrees, not where it wasn't a functional weapon, but I could get it to cant off a little bit. So anyway, moving it towards the very abusive stuff. I brought it to a tree, and I threw it at a tree 10 times, and each time, well, I didn't always hit the tree. So it's notable that not always did it hit the tree, but it whacked in various different cases, and more rattles began to develop in the handle. But overall, they were really quite minor and subtle. I couldn't get them to come through on the camera without the road noise and stuff overshadowing them. But there was a little bit of wiggle that was getting a little bit worse, but not really substantial. Not something that a little extra glue or adhesive or something shoved down in the cracks wouldn't solve. The pommel and all that were still reasonably tight. All of that was holding up well. I brought it then to the Tree of Woe, and it has warmed up slightly where I live. I live in near perpetual winter, but where I was today was almost 60 degrees outside. And in slapping the Tree of Woe, it's worth noting that it wasn't frozen out while I was doing it. I cut into it several times. I thrust into the Tree of Woe and turned really hard in an attempt to break the tip. Nothing broke or hurt the blade at all. Repeated slaps on the side did not cause the blade to break either. And it has, well, it's worth noting that the Tree of Woe has broken other swords in this regard. Slapping it on the flat of the blade hard is not an insignificant thing. It has broken other swords. It did not break this one. It did cause it to bend a little bit, though, and it's worth noting that that was present. It continued to bend throughout it, but really I had a lot of trouble swinging for the fences because this pommel hurt me if I did. So those strikes are not as robust as some of the other tests you might see. I'm swinging reasonably hard, but as hard as I can without paining myself, so to speak. Anyway, then I go to the Croquet Stake of Doom. And the Croquet Stake of Doom, it basically takes one strike and the sword falls apart. So, surprise, it broke apart at the hilt. And more or less, this is where the foreshadowing at the beginning of the review comes in. And that is that this is wildly disappointing and makes this sword, well, questionable at best as a buy. And the reason is that if you're doing the abusive things, unquestionably whacking a tree, attempting to break it, the intent that I have in this review of pushing the sword to failure should be noted. And I would expect the sword not to come out of these events unscathed. But breaking apart at the hilt is not one of the consequences that I would expect to happen. If the sword broke on the metal stake further up the blade, if it took a big dent, if it dinged significantly, if it twisted, in any of the events that I went through, all of those would be acceptable outcomes for the activity that I'm doing. But breaking apart at the hilt is certainly not one of them. The weapon is unusable. It's a catastrophic failure. It turns into a very dangerous object, and realistically shouldn't be what happens when I'm doing this kind of abuse. And so I would say that this is a major concern and something that would give me pause in buying any future Windlass Battlecry products out there. I'm not sure exactly how many have this issue, but it certainly gives me a lot of concern. Not to say that you should go out there and beat them into metal rods, or that that's an okay thing to do, but this is a thing that might run into the rim of a shield, or that may see hard impact, and it's meant to be I don't know if it's a reenactment tool, but something that's supposed to be on the durable side, on the overbuilt side, and breaking apart at the hilt isn't indicative of, I think, the expectation that most buyers are going to have at the sword, even at the $350. So that is my major concern. I wish I had some suggestion, or I wish I had one forging flaw to point to that said maybe this one was a dud, but I mean the forging looks clean. I'm not sure exactly why it failed, but This one did, and it would give me concern in buying other windlass products like it, specifically the Viking Sword. Anyway, that brings me to the point, do I personally think it's worth it or not? And no surprise here, no, I don't. At $350, it's not an inexpensive sword, but it's also not terribly expensive. The thing is, I've tested other $350 swords that hold up well. Granted, many of them have not been Viking swords, but a number of them that I've have tested have held up better than this one does. It's a significant disappointment to me that it held up as poorly as it did, and that's the main reason I would say no. Also, it's a Viking sword. No matter what it is, I would probably say no. But the thing is that this one, I think the expectation is that you're forgiving some of the crudeness, you're forgiving some of the, maybe the aesthetics of it, and you're expecting durability, and I don't think it's rewarded here. Well, it did get to the Croquet Stake of Doom, which is an accomplishment, and I should note that it didn't break apart like some other swords had. It held up longer than some others did. At the same time, one single strike and then breaking apart at the hilt almost negates that, and it's a significant disappointment, or a disappointment at least to me. So anyway, that's what I have to offer. If you think I'm off my rocker, I know this review has been more negative than some, but I like Windlass. I like the products that they make. I like them. I was really expecting more, and I'm very disappointed here. If you think I'm crazy, though, and you think that the durability and the things that I did to it were all, were excellent, and that it's very durable, and that whacking it into a metal rod is not, or should not be the litmus test for if a sword is good or durable or not, or breaking apart at the hilt is expected at that point, let me know in the comments down below. I'm happy to be wrong, but I don't think I am here. I've tested other swords in this ballpark, maybe not of the Viking variety, that have held up better, and so that's why I would say. Anyway, that's all I got. Cheers, and thanks for watching.